April 26, 1986. The night hung quietly over Pripyat, a town of quiet streets, laughter from children, and ordinary lives. Yet beneath reactor no, for at the Chernobyl nuclear power plant, a different story was unfolding, a story that no one outside would sense, but one that would ripple across decades. At 1:23 a.m., something went horribly wrong. Control rods failed, temperatures soared, alarms pierced the stillness of the control room, ignored by sleep-bound towns just miles away. Engineers scrambled, dials flashed red, and a deadly surge of energy tore through the reactor. Steam, smoke, and an invisible threat radiation began escaping, seeping silently into the environment. Inside the plant, panic coexisted with training. Operators ran checklists, flipped switches, and monitored readings with precision. Yet the complexity of the machinery was overwhelming. Each error, each hesitation, could have catastrophic consequences. The reactor, a machine meant to serve humanity, became a predator that no one could fully control. Outside, Pripyat slept. Residents did not hear the hiss of radioactive steam, did not smell the invisible hazard, and had no sense that their world was about to change forever. The danger was silent, invisible, and deadly. By sunrise, the scope of the disaster began to take shape. Smoke and flames were visible atop the reactor building, but officials minimized the risk. Public statements reassured citizens. Schools operated normally. Families carried on, oblivious to the invisible flood surrounding them. The first responders, firefighters, summoned to fight the fire, approached without proper protection. They faced an invisible enemy with only bravery as armor. Some would die within days. Others would live but bear the scars of radiation exposure for years, their suffering largely unrecorded in public memory. The human cost was immediate but largely invisible. No explosions, no dramatic newsreels of bodies, but fear, uncertainty, and anxiety crept into homes and hearts. Children played in streets, now contaminated. Families drank water, tainted by invisible particles. Every cough, every headache, every small symptom triggered worry. The disaster had invaded ordinary life quietly, profoundly, and permanently. Inside the plant, engineers faced a nightmare of misread gauges, conflicting instructions, and human error compounded by technological complexity. Each decisioned what valve to open, what warning to heed was a matter of life or death. The magnitude of what they faced was incomprehensible, and yet they acted. They saved what could be saved, but the reactor had already etched tragedy into the lives of countless people nearby. Meanwhile, officials and media carefully managed the story. Reports highlighted contained radiation and controlled responses, minimizing the terror, sanitizing the human experience, and erasing the real suffering from public consciousness. But the truth could not be fully hidden. Those present, the technicians, firefighters, and families, knew what had happened. They remembered the terror, the fear, the invisible threat that no one could see, but everyone felt. Communities were evacuated, but inconsistently. Some residents returned home briefly, unaware that danger lingered in the soil, the air, and the water. The invisible poison had reached beyond the plant, touching lives slowly, subtly, and tragically. Psychological trauma persisted. Anxiety, dread, and fear became permanent shadows in the lives of those who survived. Chernobyl revealed a universal truth. Technology, no matter how advanced, can fail in ways humanity cannot fully anticipate. Human oversight is imperfect. Bureaucracy can blind. The line between normal life and disaster is fragile. Even in a society of engineers, scientists, and procedures, a single mistake, compounded by human error, could almost destroy everything. The reactor itself became a symbol, not just of technical failure, but of the human vulnerability that accompanies progress. People's lives, homes, and health were impacted silently, invisibly. Some were lucky, some were not. Families were uprooted, children were relocated, and communities transformed into ghost towns. The public heard the numbers, radiation levels, containment successes, technical terms, but the true human suffering remained hidden, sanitized behind official reports. By nightfall, the world outside Pripyat was starting to sense that something had occurred, though the full horror remained unspoken. Engineers monitored radiation, firefighters treated early exposure symptoms, and families huddled together, uneasy. The disaster had begun quietly, and it would continue to echo silently for decades. The incident forced governments and nuclear agencies to rethink safety measures. Lessons were learned through pain, but the human stories were largely erased from textbooks and headlines. Those who witnessed the chaos, the fear, the courage, the helplessness, carried their memories in silence. Chernobyl was not a fire, not an explosion, not a dramatic disaster that could be captured in a single photograph. Its horror was invisible, slow, and deeply human. It seeped into water, air, and the psyche, and it reminds us today that even the most advanced societies, armed with technology and knowledge, remain vulnerable to errors, oversight, and unseen forces. The silent chaos of Chernobyl, the understated human toll, the fear that could not be televised, these are the stories erased from history. Yet they linger in every memory of those who lived through it. The world outside may have moved on, but Pripyat Reactor 4 and the lives touched by radiation stand as eternal witnesses to what happens when human ambition meets fragile technology. As days passed, the invisible enemy began to reveal itself in terrifying ways. Farmers noticed their livestock falling ill. Water supplies carried unseen poison. Families who had returned too soon felt strange rashes, persistent coughs, and fatigue. Radiation moved silently, unconcerned with borders or human schedules, touching life without warning. Inside hospitals, doctors confronted an unfamiliar reality. Patients arrived with burns, nausea, and bleeding, symptoms that defied standard medical experience. Treatments were improvised. Doctors and nurses worked tirelessly, often unaware of the personal danger they themselves faced. Each act of care carried a silent risk of contamination, a human sacrifice hidden behind sterile white coats. The government struggled to contain both the disaster and its narrative. Evacuations were delayed, information was carefully filtered, citizens were told the plant was under control, yet the truth was far more frightening. Families, neighbors, and communities lived in quiet terror, unsure whether they were safe, unsure whether they had been exposed, unsure whether the ground beneath their feet would betray them. Children, particularly vulnerable to radiation, became silent carriers of history. Their parents could only hope, pray, and relocate them away from the invisible threat. Memories of abandoned homes, contaminated streets, and the sudden disappearance of friends and neighbors lingered, haunting the towns for years to come. The disaster's human cost was deep, silent, and enduring. Engineers and firefighters who had responded in the initial hours carried their own burdens. Many developed illnesses years later, some died prematurely. PTSD-like symptoms persisted, nightmares of alarms, flashes of burning metal, the choking fear of being powerless against an unseen force. These stories were rarely told, buried beneath technical reports and statistics. Yet the emotional scars remained vivid for those who had survived, shaping the human narrative of Chernobyl more than any government statement ever could. The abandoned city of Pripyat became a ghost town. Schools, amusement parks, and apartment blocks froze in time, haunting symbols of a life interrupted. Radiation maps, safety zones, and warning signs now dominated the landscape, but they could never fully convey the silent chaos and the stories of families ripped from their homes. Tourists might see decay and paint it as eerie, but the invisible suffering, fear, uncertainty, loss was a reality the world could barely comprehend. Chernobyl also exposed the fragility of society's trust in technology. People believed in science, in expertise, in systems designed to protect them. Yet the disaster revealed that even the most sophisticated machines are vulnerable, and even the most skilled humans are fallible. The lesson was brutal. Progress carries hidden risks, and oversight can fail in ways that imperceptibly destroy lives. Years later, studies quantified radiation exposure, birth defects, and health effects. But no chart or graph could capture the human stories. The mother who lost a child, the father who could not return home, the children who grew up carrying invisible scars. These were not failures of data, they were failures of memory. History almost forgot the human faces behind the meltdown. The psychological impact was profound. Communities once thriving faced displacement, social upheaval, and fear of unseen enemies in their own homes. Trust eroded. People feared the very air and water meant to sustain life. Generations grew up with the silent echo of catastrophe, a trauma that statistics could not measure. The disaster also forced the world to confront the ethical dimensions of technology. Nuclear energy promised progress, power, and modernity, but it also carried the potential for devastation. Governments, scientists, and engineers were reminded that ambition, unchecked by caution, oversight, and transparency can lead to tragedies that history may try to erase, but that human memory will never forget. Decades later, Chernobyl's legacy remains a lesson in humility. Nuclear power continues to be debated, but the stories of invisible suffering, the silent courage of responders, and the lives forever altered stand as a testament to the human cost of nearly invisible disasters. The town, the reactor, the evacuated families all remain symbols of what happens when human oversight falters and the invisible forces of technology collide with ordinary life. Some disasters are loud, some explode in fire and smoke, some, like Chernobyl, creep silently, almost unseen, yet leave permanent scars on every life they touch. And for those who experienced it, no report, no map, no sanitized history book can ever erase the memory of that April night in 1986, when the world almost learned how fragile modern life truly is.